What's going on, guys? It's Jimmy back again with a brand new installment where we crack open the files on cases that have finally been put to rest. But real quick before we dive in, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss an upload. It was a peaceful Sunday back in the summer of 2016 when a young lady walked out the front door of her mom's place in Princeton, Massachusetts. Her plan was just to take a quick jog down the tree-lined streets she had grown up with, but she never made it home. That afternoon, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte, a successful account manager for Google based out of New York City, was brutally murdered. It kicked off an intense 8-month search and a massive manhunt that eventually led to a conviction and some closure. Vanessa entered the world on June 17, 1989, in Leominster, Massachusetts. She was the only kid of John and Rosanna Marcotte and spent her childhood raised in the Worcester County region, where she went to the Bancroft School before earning her degree with honors from Boston University in 2011. Once she finished school, Vanessa launched a career in digital marketing, starting at a Boston ad startup called WordStream and later moving to Vistaprint. By January 2015, she had secured what her folks called her absolute dream gig, working as an account manager at Google's headquarters in New York City. Her co-workers look back on her as a super friendly and energetic person, famous for her charity efforts and her passion for Boston sports teams. When she wasn't working, Vanessa poured her heart into giving back, spending time at food pantries, mentoring high schoolers, and helping out at Boston Children's Hospital. Even though she had built a life down in New York, she kept a really strong connection to her roots in Massachusetts. She was constantly coming back up to see her mom and aunt in Princeton, a sleepy little rural community in Worcester County with a population under 4,000 people. It was the kind of spot where you felt totally secure walking down the country lanes, but that safety evaporated on August 7th, 2016. That Sunday, Vanessa headed out from her mother's place over on Brook Station Road right around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She intended to get some exercise in before hopping on a bus to head back to New York City later that night. Folks reported seeing her grab a drink at the Mountainside Market on Hubbardston Road, and the last sighting of her alive was while she chatted on her phone around 1:15. Someone else spotted a car tailing Vanessa, flipping a U-turn and circling back to follow her again, so when she didn't show up hours later, her family dialed 911. Police kicked off a search operation right away, and at roughly 8:15 that night, canine units located her remains in the thick woods just off the street, not even a half-mile from her mom's driveway. Detectives on the scene instantly treated the incident as a homicide. Vanessa was found without clothes and had suffered burns on her face, hands, and feet, while the medical examiner confirmed she died from strangulation. She also took severe blows to the head, resulting in a broken nose and sustained crushing damage to her windpipe. Her gym clothes, mobile phone, and headphones were nowhere to be found and were never located, leading police to suspect the killer took them as twisted souvenirs from the crime. Evidence showed Vanessa put up a hell of a fight, and records indicated her phone went dark at exactly 2:11 in the afternoon, which detectives figure was probably the moment she was killed. Right after the murder, police set up a round-the-clock hotline and got slammed with over 1,300 calls from the community. From the jump, officials announced that the guy who attacked Vanessa was likely a man who would definitely have scratches, lacerations, and bruising all over his face and arms. They ruled out the idea that she knew him, leaning toward the theory that this was a totally random act of violence. Come November 2016, the task force dropped a major piece of information. They were hunting for intel on a dark-colored SUV that was spotted parked on the street right where the murder happened. In February 2017, the district attorney for Worcester County announced they had analyzed DNA from under Vanessa's fingernails to build a suspect profile. Using that genetic evidence and witness accounts, police described the suspect as a Hispanic man, likely in his late 20s or early 30s. They figured he was average height, athletic, with a buzz cut or shaved head, and had access to that dark SUV. The case finally cracked open, thanks to an incredible stroke of luck mixed with some sharp eyes from a police officer. A Massachusetts state trooper working the detective unit noticed a guy driving through Worcester who looked just like the sketch. He was behind the wheel of a dark SUV that matched the exact description witnesses gave from the day of the attack. The officer scrawled the tag number on his own hand and went to knock on the driver's door the very next day. The guy behind the wheel turned out to be Angelo Colon Ortiz, a 31-year-old local from Worcester. He voluntarily gave a DNA swab, and it was a perfect match for the genetic material recovered from Vanessa's hands. Police cuffed him on April 14, 2017, and 4 days later he faced a judge at Leominster District Court who set his bond at a staggering $10 million. Originally from Puerto Rico, Angelo had only relocated to the Worcester area roughly 12 months prior to the assault. With a wife and 3 kids at home and zero rap sheet, he made his living driving trucks for a third-party contractor handling FedEx routes. Running those delivery routes meant he knew the back roads of Princeton and the neighboring communities like the back of his hand. Digital evidence from his phone placed him right in that specific vicinity on the very afternoon Vanessa lost her life. Even though his record was clean on paper, the stories circulating among those who actually knew him told a much darker tale. Folks living nearby pegged him as a creep who was constantly shouting gross, uncalled-for remarks at people passing by his house. The guy also seemed to operate under the completely false impression that Spanish was some secret code that nobody around him could possibly understand. Coworkers claimed he'd make twisted remarks in Spanish, assuming they were clueless, but they actually understood enough to report his behavior to management. He managed to hold on to his job regardless, even though everyone basically viewed him as an explosion waiting to happen. His legal team must have seen the writing on the wall and known they had zero shot at winning on the actual facts of the case, so they decided to launch a desperate Hail Mary play to save their client. They tried to get the DNA tossed out by claiming he didn't really grasp his rights due to a language barrier when he agreed to the swab. The argument was that the state troopers didn't speak good enough Spanish and completely botched the translation of the consent paperwork. Fast forward to January of 2022, and the judge presiding over the matter flatly rejected the request to throw out the genetic proof, giving prosecutors the green light to move forward with the trial. Considering he held down a job in an English-speaking environment, it's pretty obvious that defense strategy never really had a leg to stand on. On October 26, 2022, over 6 years since the murder, Angelo stood in Worcester Superior Court and admitted guilt to every single count. Vanessa's family actually asked for that plea arrangement because they couldn't bear the thought of dragging through a painful courtroom battle. The agreement ensures he won't see a parole board until he's 81. Back in the autumn of 1987, Boise, Idaho, still felt like a tight-knit community. People didn't lock their doors over fear of violence back then, and everyone living around Vista Avenue seemed to know everybody else's business. One of the staples at the Vista Village Shopping Center was 65-year-old Joyce Casper, the lady who ran the local Hallmark and gift store. She was a total legend in the neighborhood, managing a spot that had started out as an old-school pharmacy with a soda fountain for the school kids. Everyone respected Joyce for how incredibly hard she worked. You could set your watch by her. She'd stay way past the 9 p.m. closing time just to clean up and get everything organized for the next day. That routine made her reliable to her customers, but sadly, it also made her an easy target for anyone watching from the shadows. A few weeks before October 13, 1987, things took a really dark turn. Joyce told Boise police that some guy in his early 20s tried to jump her in the lot right behind her business. But Joyce wasn't the type to just roll over and take it. She smacked him right across the mug, stunning him long enough for her to scramble into her car and peel out of there. Cops looked into it but couldn't put a name to the face, so the case stalled. Then the sun came up on October 13th. Someone walking by spotted Joyce's remains slumped inside her vehicle near where Day Drive meets Robert Street. She was only a stone's throw from her storefront, right next to the railroad crossing. The papers said the town was in total shock, and with no bad guy in handcuffs, panic started tearing through the community like wildfire. The police launched what became one of the most exhaustive manhunts the city of Boise had ever seen. Investigators from Violent Crimes and SVU worked around the clock, eventually vetting and clearing about 150 different persons of interest. They crossed state lines chasing leads, burning the candle at both ends and losing plenty of sleep over it. Even with all that blood, sweat, and tears, the investigation barely moved an inch. Genetic testing was basically sci-fi back in the late 80s and wasn't useful for forensics yet, which made everything harder. On top of that, they had zero CCTV footage, no eyeballs on the crime, and barely any physical clues besides some biological samples found on site. Considering the limitations of crime lab technology at that specific time, the trail went cold. Although the lead investigator kept pushing for advanced testing on the evidence even after he handed in his badge. Officers officially dusted off the cold case files in 2005, and by 2017, a pair of fresh investigators were dedicated around the clock with cutting-edge tools. They packaged up genetic samples, harvested directly from the NDAM, initial murder site, and shipped them off to an independent laboratory capable of building a suspect's appearance purely from their biology. The analysis pointed toward a man with Latino roots, potentially hailing from Puerto Rico or Colombia, sporting dark hair and eyes that were either brown or hazel. Police shared a digital sketch with the community in October of 2017, yet the tip line remained frustratingly silent. Come 2019, authorities pivoted to yet another breakthrough method, hiring a genealogy firm to hunt down the killer through family trees. When spring rolled around in 2023, the probe finally zeroed in on one particular clan living out in the Treasure Valley region. Investigators hopped a flight to Southern California to secure cheek swabs from the two adult sons of a guy named Frank Rodriguez. The Idaho State Police Forensic Lab ran the tests on those samples, and sure enough, they found a perfect link to the traces left at the scene. It turned out Frank had relocated from Massachusetts to Idaho during his teen years and resided only a couple of streets away from Joyce's business when the tragedy occurred. He was likely about 17 years of age back in October of 1987, which roughly aligned with the physical stats and age bracket Joyce described to officers following that previous close call. Detectives eventually concluded that Rodriguez was almost certainly the exact same individual who tried to ambush Joyce just weeks prior to her murder. Their theory was that he came back for revenge, fueled by anger after she successfully defended herself during their first encounter. Authorities painted a picture of Frank as someone suffering from serious mental health struggles, specifically noting deep-seated issues with uncontrollable rage. His rap sheet in Idaho wasn't clean either, listing a conviction for aggravated battery from 1995 alongside various other offenses. Sad to say, Rodriguez would never actually stand trial or answer for the brutal things he did to Joyce. Back in 2007, due to motives that remain blurry, Rodriguez chose to end his own story, burying the truth along with himself. Police also mentioned that considering how violent the attack was, it was hard to imagine this was the only time Rodriguez ever crossed the line. Departments all over the jest. Nations started combing through their cold files for potential links, though so far nothing else has been pinned on him. As for the Casper clan, they finally reached the conclusion of a painful chapter they had been waiting nearly a lifetime to close. However, the victory tasted mixed, knowing the perpetrator was beyond the reach of the law and would never sit in a jail cell. Even so, one of her kids mentioned that just having the solid truth offered a peace of mind they had been chasing for the better part of their adulthood. What is up, guys? This is Jimmy, jumping in with a fast nudge to go ahead and smash that subscribe button if you are not already part of the crew. Plus, do not forget you can help keep this channel running by grabbing a YouTube membership or heading over to my Patreon page. Late into the night on October 1st, 1974, a 21-year-old guy named Daniel Walker steered his Volkswagen bus off Interstate 40, about 60 miles west of Needles, California. He was making his way across the vast Mojave Desert and had actually stopped for a hitchhiker a bit earlier that night near the Cajon Pass area. The rider, an 18-year-old named Ken Robinson, was trying to get to Texas, so Daniel seemingly changed his own travel plans to give the kid a hand. That was just a standard move for him, seeing as everyone who knew him described him as the type of guy who lived to help others. Articles written after he passed would highlight how he was constantly looking out for folks, sadly noting that this specific kindness would be the final one he ever offered. Now, if you are bracing for a cliché tale where the kind driver gets betrayed by the passenger he saved, you might want to hold that thought. Daniel pulled the vehicle over onto the gravel shoulder of the highway so they could catch a few winks. Robinson crashed in the rear section, blocked from view by piles of Daniel's equipment. Around 6 o'clock that morning, Daniel was suddenly startled out of his sleep by an unknown figure. Before he even had a chance to process the situation, the gunman opened fire and struck him several times. Based on the timeline detectives put together later, it seems Daniel was pleading for mercy while the assault was taking place. Robinson, who was buried under the stuff in the back of the bus, managed to stay completely off the shooter's radar. Once the killer took off, the kids scrambled out and eventually waved down a driver on the road to radio for assistance. Paramedics rushed Daniel to a nearby medical center, but the damage was too extensive, and he passed away that same day, only 2 weeks before turning 22. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department launched a full-scale homicide inquiry right off the bat. Robinson gave them details on what the guy in his car looked like, yet detectives struggled to find any solid tracks to follow. Although investigators looked sideways at Robinson right out of the gate, they exonerated him almost immediately. Detectives started digging around and soon realized the evidence didn't match up with any standard criminal logic. Someone had torn the cash and ignition keys right out of Daniel's trousers, but they strangely ignored everything else worth taking. That odd discrepancy pointed toward a frantic getaway or a mindset much more chaotic than a simple stick-up. Even with a witness description and hard proof, the trail turned ice cold and remained frozen for almost 50 years. Losing Daniel absolutely shattered the household, especially for his kid brother Doug, who was only 15 back then. Doug remembered some friction between Daniel and their dad, which is exactly why his brother headed out toward the coast. According to Doug, their father never really bounced back and carried the guilt for the events that ended in Daniel's murder. For decades, the Walker clan stuck to a heartbreaking routine of burying the past to survive, but Doug simply refused to let it go. In 2010, Doug flew out to California's Inland Empire to walk the exact same path his brother took. Investigators dusted off the old case files during that trip, but they hit a brick wall. Years down the road, Doug poured all that sorrow and investigation into a manuscript called Daniel, My Brother, Mystery in the Mojave. Fascinatingly enough, he wrote that memoir alongside Ken Robinson, the very hitchhiker who made it out alive that night. They kept in touch through the years, united by a hunger for justice, which brings a rare bit of warmth to this grim story. The volume hit the shelves. In October 2023, almost 49 years exactly after the murder, and suddenly everything changed. On November 15, 2023, only weeks after the release, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit cracked the file open again. Investigators got their hands on fresh leads and zeroed in on a suspect, Thomas Creech, a 73-year-old serial killer locked up in Idaho. That name rattled the entire true crime community and the Walkers, because Creech might just be one of the deadliest monsters on record. Born in Dayton, Ohio, back in 1950, Creech was raised in a chaotic home full of constant fighting that eventually split his parents up for good. He hit the road as a teen runaway, and by his mid-20s, he had racked up a horrific history of violence spanning several states. Courts had already found him guilty of 5 separate murders across Idaho, Oregon, and California. On top of those verdicts, law enforcement felt certain that solid proof tied him to at least 6 other victims. Creech actually bragged about committing up to 42 homicides at one point, although he eventually walked that number back to 26. Sadly, guys like him often view a higher body count as some kind of twisted trophy or achievement. A lot of his stories featured wild details about dark occult ceremonies and hit jobs for biker clubs. That habit made it incredibly tough for detectives to sort reality from fiction, but they are convinced there is at least a grain of truth buried in those extra admissions. The thread tying Creech to Daniel Walker emerged from what the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department called specific tidbits found in previous interviews Creech gave to police. Teaming up with the Ada County DA in Idaho, investigators managed to match those remarks directly to evidence from the murder file. This breakthrough happened at a crucial moment because it landed only days before a parole board in Idaho planned to decide if they should swap Creech's execution for a life term. Prosecutors in Ada County pointed to the Walker murder as more evidence of Creech's heartless savagery. The legal team representing Creech fought tooth and nail against those accusations. His lawyer argued the evidence was incredibly flimsy, but they weren't arguing in a standard court of law. Instead, this was a clemency meeting designed to halt his date with the executioner. Counsel claimed the whole argument rested on vague comments Creech allegedly made ages ago that were suddenly being weaponized. The defense noted that authorities attempted to tie Creech to Daniel's death as far back as 1975, yet they never managed to make the charges hold up. That hearing turned into quite a scene, ending with the Idaho Commission of Pardons and Parole split 3-3 on granting mercy. According to state regulations, that deadlock meant his execution order remained in full effect. Governor Brad Little refused to step in, so the death warrant was finalized for February 28, 2024. But when that date arrived, the situation took a shocking turn because the execution failed. Even though the team tried their hardest for an hour and poked 8 different spots on his limbs, every single vein collapsed. The entire procedure was a bust. Officials scrubbed the mission, and they marched the prisoner right back to his living quarters. They marked November 13, 2024, for round 2, but a judge paused it a week early for legal review. His lawyers argued that trying to kill him again would be completely cruel. They also labeled it unusual punishment, claiming the first botched attempt left him with severe stress. As a result, the Idaho prison system paused all lethal injections to upgrade the room for options like a firing squad. As we head into late 2025, Creech is still sitting on death row at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. His legal fights are still dragging on, and his final destiny hangs in the balance. Daniel Walker's story is really about the scary randomness of violence and the heavy load it dumps on survivors. Identifying Thomas Creech as the likely killer provided a small sense of relief. However, it didn't provide the neat or satisfying closure that one might expect. Authorities never officially charged Creech for the murder, and with his current mess of legal issues, they probably never will. On top of that, some observers have raised a valid point. They claim the evidence available to the public that links him to the crime is actually pretty thin. Since a courtroom trial is likely off the table, we may never learn why police are so sure Creech is the guy. Speaking for myself, it is tough to view this case as fully closed with the limited facts we have right now. That said, the official investigation seems to have hit a wall, so this uncertain ending is likely all we get. Considering the massive list of crimes on his record, I honestly wonder, I doubt he even remembers if he was the one who actually took Daniel's life.